Welcome to Just Say Hey, the podcast where we talk about the things that matter to small farms. You know why? Because we are a small farm. You know, a lot of people look up to police officers and doctors and nurses and guys in the military. And I do too. I do too. But the guys that are my heroes are farmers. The humility, the care, the kind of rough around the edges kindness, the genuine concern for the neighbor. These are the guys that are my heroes, the guys that I want to be like, the guys that I want my life to be like. And while I do look up to police and nurses and doctors, my son is in the Navy and my daughter is a wound care nurse. They both chose fields of service. And I respect that. I have a great respect for that. But again, my heroes have always been the farmers, the guys that work from sun up until before sun up to after sundown. And the small farmers are taking a beating. And if you don't believe me, from 2017 to 2022, we lost 153,000 small farms. But during that same time period, we gained 30,000 big farms, big corporate industrial farms. The small farmers are taking a beating. And I'll kind of jump aside here for a second. This morning, I was scrolling social media, kind of scrolling around, looking at, I like to see what my friends post and things they're thinking and saying and pictures and stuff like that. Anyway, guy I know, good guy, like him, nice guy. He posts a lot of political comments, but I have never seen him post anything where he provides a solution. And the things and the ways he posts divide us. They pit us in camps, me versus you. It doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. There are more things that we agree on than we disagree on. But to be able to have that conversation, you have to be open to ideas. And I say that because we have to find a solution, in my opinion, for the small farmer. I think it's vital for our country. I think it's vital for our food supply. I think it's vital for our health. So I think we have to find a way to do that. And again, I don't like to just complain. So I'm going to provide an idea. I don't know whether it's a good one or not. I've been thinking about it. I did a podcast a while back and I mentioned it. It came to me right off the top of my head, but I've thought about it a lot and it makes a little bit of sense. So, with that, if you are listening to this podcast on your whatever app you listen to it on, or if you're watching this on YouTube, follow it in your podcast app or like and follow us on YouTube. It helps the channel out a lot. And with that, let's get into it. Welcome to Just Say Hey, the podcast where we talk about what matters to small farms, whether it's business, marketing, agronomy, equipment, livestock. If it matters to small farms, we'll probably talk about it here. So let's get into it. The American farmer, like we were talking about, is taking a beating. And I really break this down into four basic areas. I think you have corporate consolidation, large farms buying up small farms. You have, if you farm, this is true, the skyrocketing input costs without the ability to adjust our output prices. It's brutal to deal with. You can look at diesel, you can look at fertilizer, you can look at labor, you can look at pretty much anything you want, and the prices have gone up. Our costs have gone up. But there's two areas that I think there is room to provide solutions. And as we talked about in the beginning, the farm subsidies favor big farms. And I think that goes back to the mid 70s, where there was a kind of a push to go big or get out type of farming mentality. And it was sort of that the end of the Industrial Revolution, we finally had tractors and equipment that could do massive amounts of work. And so you had that push. And I think at the time it might have seemed like a good idea. But I think in retrospect, it has spawned a lot of things that have been unhealthy for our country. It has done damage to the food, the quality of food that we eat in this country. It has done damage to and through the food, done damage to the health of our country. And there are ways that we can fix this. The other area that we should talk about is, and my idea provides a possible solution, is as a small farmer, you have limited access to markets and distribution, just economies of scale. And I'll give an example. If you ever get bored, go onto Kroger's website or go onto Walmart's website, and if you dig in there deep enough, you will find a link that will tell you how do you become a vendor, which that means how do you sell stuff to them. There is a process. And when I say it's a process, it's a process. I've helped some people go through it, just getting set up for it and some stuff like that. And it is a process. So if you can take care of that subsidies, which is basically a security net, the whole idea behind the subsidy is to protect our food security so that we can protect our communities and protect the fact that we can feed, heck, we feed the world now, but now we want to provide healthy food to the world. So if we can provide a safety net of some sort, and we can open up markets to small farms, they can grow into medium-sized farms and hopefully maintain that same quality, that same, the benefits of eating local food, eating fresh food will come back to our communities. But to get there, I think we need to understand that dirty little secret that the Farm Bill does not help the small farmer. I mean, there's some language in the latest version of it where they sort of make it seem like, oh, there's a lot of help in here for new and beginning farmers, and there's a lot of help there, but it ain't there. If you've ever tried to work through it, it ain't there. We tried. No help. No help that actually helps. Let's put it that way. There's no help that actually helps. So, once you understand that Farm Bill is not there to help the small farmer, I think you start to get some ideas of how do we do this. So, if you understand what the Farm Bill is, right now, it handles a lot of things like farm subsidies, crop insurance, which is a subsidy. It handles the conservation, so the CRP program, a little bit of rural development. But the biggest thing it does is it's called the Supplemental Nutrition and Assistance Program. Or not I think it's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's the modern incarnation of food stamps. In my humble opinion, if we're trying to help people eat healthier, give them a healthy way to get through this time when they are struggling, which is what the food stamp, the SNAP program is supposed to be, people who are struggling, to be able to help them eat healthy, be able to eat and put food on the table so that they can get to a point in their life where they become successful and eventually leave the program. I think that probably isn't part of the Department of Agriculture. It probably is, something to do with health. Because I was in the grocery store the other day and a guy in front of me, and I don't go to the grocery store very often, it's pretty rare, but I was in the grocery store and a guy in front of me had a 12-pack of Diet Coke and a bag of Doritos. And he paid for it with SNAP. Does that help the small farmer? No. Did it really help him? Maybe. I mean, you could argue that. But was that a healthy, if you're in the position where you need that kind of help, and this is not putting down anybody who's in that position. I mean, we could all be there. There's circumstances where we could all end up in that type of a situation. But you want to provide healthy food so that that person can become healthy, can become productive, can become part of a society and become part of the help for the next guy who's in that problem. But all that money there went to big food, big ag, and the grocery store. Nothing in that went to the small farmer. And I mean, I'm sure there are people that will argue and say, oh, well, you know what? That corn could have been grown on a small farm. Chances are it wasn't. Maybe a little bit of it. Out of a bag of Doritos, maybe a quarter of a chip. But, you know, that idea of that being in the farm program, but if it's going to be there, it should do something to help farms, or it should help the food safety. So, you know, to get down this road and sort of understand what I'm talking about, I think we need to kind of step back a bit and understand the Farm Bill, kind of the history of it. If you've never heard of the Dust Bowl, you probably, if you're my age, you have probably had to read a book about it called The Grapes of Wrath, about the Depression. There's a lot of people that will tie the Depression to the Dust Bowl and some of the things that came out of it. But Dust Bowl was, I mean, if you've never heard of it, Ken Burns did a documentary on it. Fantastic. You ought to go watch it. It will educate you a little bit. But look it up and research it. But after the Dust Bowl was like in 1929 or 1930. And I think, you know, if you look at it, it started in 1930, but the worst years of it were 34 to 39. Excuse me. But in when it started in 1930, we saw, hey, this is a problem. And they started to pass, I say they, Washingtonians, the folk in Washington, passed the first farm bill, which is called the Agricultural Adjustment Act. This was 1933. And it was the idea, it was during the Great Depression, and sort of, you know, part of FDR's New Deal. The whole idea was to stabilize prices, stabilize crop prices. We had this whole population of people that were going under, and so it was helping the small farmer and helping people. When I say help, and helping the country get through this ecological disaster. And if you don't, I'm not one of the wacko environmentalists. Don't go crazy on me. But this was the largest man-made ecological disaster in human history. And to protect against that, the government came up with the idea, let's get less land in crops. And so we started paying farmers not to farm. Well, that we had similar farm bills going all the way from that early 1933, all the way through the 40s, 50s, 60s. When you get into 1970, you have a shift, and you had the Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz was his name, horrible name, man. Had this get big or get out was sort of the mentality of the ag secretary in the 1970s. These policies that they set, that the USDA set, was large-scale farming. We finally had equipment that could handle it. Finally had, commodity, really wanted the commodity market. So corn, overproduction of corn, soybeans, wheat. And these changes led to big ag and corporate consolidation and large agribusiness. Then you go from the 70s, the mid 80s, 1985 was when the next big farm bill, where they really pushed conservation, and we got the programs like the CRP program. And the CRP program was, it's to take the concept of it was, you take this ground that's not very good farm ground, you pay landowners not to farm it. You don't necessarily pay farmers. You pay landowners not to farm it, so they can't lease it out to other farmers. Well, there's a lot of ground in the CRP program that is not it's not environmentally volatile ground. But what it does to the small farmer is it takes that ground out of the market. And so a guy who was going to put in a vegetable farm, or a guy who wanted to do, something else, plant pumpkins or something else that's labor intensive, which is what a lot of small farms have to do, you can't now because there's no ground available. And the ground that they could use has been taken up by the CRP program, where they're paying almost competitive rent grounds to landowners to do nothing with it. And I have farmed some ground that has come out of CRP, and it's horrible. It's horrible ground. Not good for anything. I mean, it takes so much work to get ground out of CRP, and there's supposed to be maintenance requirements. They're supposed to plant grass on it every so many years, and they have to mow it once a year, and nobody checks it. Nobody checks in on it. Then you get into the 1990s, and you had this called the Freedom to Farm Act, which it basically deregulated the farming industry, reduced government control over crops. It shifted policies towards subsidies rather than price controls. And it led to greater, even more corporate consolidation, and made it very volatile for small farmers. And so you finally get to 2014, 2018. And again, the Farm Bill does not do anything to help small farmers, but there's some language in there that makes it seem like it's really helpful to small farmers. There's these programs that are for new and beginning farmers where you can get lower interest loans. You can, there's other things. I've never seen one that actually helps. And we've tried. Never seen one that actually helps. That's not more work than it's worth. That actually provides a benefit without so many bureaucratic hoops to jump through that the small guy can't do it because, you know what? You can't fill all that paperwork out because you have to farm. The bottom line is, the crop insurance and the financial safety net for industrial ag doesn't help the small farmer. And the few small farmers it does help, good for them. But for the vast majority of small farms, it's either no help or close to no help. Which brings me to this. Now is the time that small farmers and those people who care about small farmers need to start talking and having conversations. And I'm not saying we need to be combative or angry or anything else. I'm saying that we need to start having conversations that, if you know somebody who is, in the political area, whether it's your local guy or whether it's a state or a national representative, talk to them. The only way you can get people, when I say people, companies, to do the right thing, do what you want them to do, there's two ways. You can use the carrot or the stick. And the carrot is financially reward them for doing what you want them to do. And the stick is punish them for doing what you don't want them to do. What if, and let me step back for just a second, because I think this, what we would all like to see, I think, is to be able to go to the grocery store and buy vegetables, fruits, meats that are all raised locally. I mean, there's not much downside to it. If you buy these things that are raised locally and you can buy them at a competitive price, everybody wins. Now, some prices might go up, some might come down. It's going to depend, but the overall, everybody sort of wins in this. You get a healthier product. I mean, I saw somebody talking about it not too long ago where they compared a tomato that was picked when it was green ripened in a container on a ship coming from, I forget where it was. I want to say it was like Argentina or something. It was someplace way far away, and got to the grocery store when it was perfectly red. Now, the health benefits of that tomato, there was almost none. It was red-colored water. But when you looked at the tomato from a local guy, it might not have been as visually perfect, but it had more vitamins, nutrients, less pesticides, less, it just didn't, it was a better product. So if we could do that, now all of a sudden everybody starts to win. The small farmer starts to win. The grocery store starts to win. The consumer starts to win. You're seeing a pattern here. So what if in this farm bill that's getting ready to come up, we've extended it. It was originally written in 2014, again amended in 2018. It's coming up for renewal. And I hope that there is some language in there to protect the small farmer. So what if instead of subsidies for corporate farms, we encouraged grocery stores to purchase fruits, vegetables, meats within a 100-mile radius of their store? I don't know, pick a number, but a 100-mile radius of their store. They get a tax benefit for it. What if we gave them a tax benefit if 10% of their fresh foods came from a 100-mile radius? And if they got to 20%, they got an even bigger, really encouraging them. Again, the carrot versus the stick. So you encourage them to buy locally. Everybody wins. You include the SNAP program in that. So again, you can get a discount on, maybe there's a benefit for people on SNAP to get healthier foods instead of continuing to eat processed foods that are bad for us. They taste good. Don't get me wrong. I like a good cup of ramen noodles. But they're not good for me. And I mean, if you see the documentary, I mean, you can eat a whole meal with a ramen noodle and it fills the gut. You don't feel hungry. And depending on where you get it, that whole meal costs less than one tomato. So, we have some issues to figure out there. But again, there has got to be a way to help the people that are on that SNAP program that need it, to provide them with a better service so that they get healthy, mentally, physically healthy, get off of the SNAP program, and then become part of the solution to help the next guy. And all of this not only helps the local community because that money stays locally, it helps the grocery stores because they're making the same money or making more money. It helps the people that need it in the SNAP program. It helps the small farmer. I mean, there's a lot to be said for it. It creates a desire by corporate grocery stores to buy locally, to overcome the impediments of distribution and supply, to buy locally. So it creates that market that's almost impossible to attain for a small farmer. I mean, it might encourage small farmers to become part of co-ops, to create co-ops to deal with those type of chains. It could encourage crop diversity. I mean, what's the old adage? You see a need, you fill a need. If a grocery store, yeah, we've got a big tomato farm down here. We don't need tomatoes, but what we could use is peaches. Why don't you plant some peach trees? I can do that. Okay, so we get diversity. And when we have that, now all of a sudden we start to have built a healthy, sustainable food source. Provides greater security, provides greater nutrition, keeps the money in communities. I mean, now there are some cons that I see. Difficult for large grocery stores because distribution and that I had a friend who ran the produce department of a grocery store out east, and there's a lot of waste and there is a lot of movement. And that having that regularly timed delivery, having that perfect schedule every time, I think that's a challenge for grocery stores because any type of retail store, what they like to do is see little shiny things go over that register. So you have to keep that supply up. So that's a challenge. And again, you have the idea of cost. overall cost to the consumer, because here in the U.S., we have labor laws. We protect our workers. We have environmental concerns. We have to protect the environment, not only because we want to do it, but because we are forced to do it, that other countries don't have. I mean, you see the news stories from time to time about contaminated fish. Well, we bring these fish in from China, who has no environmental controls. I think the number's like 30% of all arable, tillable land in China is contaminated to the point that it can't grow food. I mean, they have no controls. So yeah, you got to pay a little more for food that doesn't have mercury in it, you know? So that's a concern. Has this been tried before? Well, in my limited research, there's a couple of small programs that I found with farmers markets that were fairly successful. And there was a few state initiatives that I found the state initiatives that I found mostly had to do with government procurement. So buying food for government institutions, prisons, government buildings, things like that. So when we see these problems, we have the opportunity to be divisive and just complain about them, or put up an idea. If it's a good idea, other people will agree. If you don't think this is a good idea, show me what you got. I'm open. I want to talk about it. And then we need to talk to those people that have the ability to make that change, that have the ability to push this down the road the next little bit. Don't sit around and think you can't win. You can. I think there are some opportunities coming down the road that I'm excited for. I think that we have to talk about these problems, because if people aren't aware of them, they don't know the problem. When you see the farm bills, when you see these things, oh, it's the pretty little farmhouse and it's the Norman Rockwell picture, and they get the farm bill passed and it doesn't help farmers. I think that's an issue. And so we need to talk about these things, but we need to talk about it in a way where we provide solutions. With that, I'll let you go. You have a wonderful day. Good luck, and God bless.